This is K.M. Weiland, and you are listening to the 292nd episode of the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. Lately, I've been using a little trick to help me stay focused when I'm writing. I'm working on my historical superhero story Wayfarer, set in Regency, England, so there are a lot of historical details I have to be aware of as I'm writing. The result is that it's easy to get pulled off track whenever I run into a fact I need to find or check. Instead of stopping my writing momentum, what I do is stick in a place filler, or my best guess as to the answer, and I bold it. So I'll be sure to notice it and remember to check it later when I'm revising. The result is that my writing goes much faster, my attention is much less scattered, and I get more done. The latest post in the video series on my blog is an easy way to immediately improve your character's action beats. It shows you how to take your dialogue's action beats up a notch by focusing on symbolism and subtext. Find the post, visit my site at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And now I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast entitled, Find Out If Your Prologue is Destroying Your Story's Subtext. You hear it all the time. Prologues are evil, and writers everywhere commence howling. Now, I'll grant that evil is a slight exaggeration. We might call them dangerous instead. Except that word is pretty ironic, since one of the chief reasons a prologue is so dangerous is because it allows authors to play it way yonder too safe. So what in the big green world am I talking about? Prologues offer many dangers, a few of which include forcing readers to begin the story twice, grabbing readers with a fake hook, which also causes the writer the extra work of then having to come up with two brilliant hooks, one for the prologue and one for the real first chapter, creating prime real estate for info dumping, wasting readers' time with the intro material instead of allowing them to get into the real story right away, forcing readers to accept the author's hand-holding, and killing subtext. All of these are all integrally related, but that last is the one I want to zero in on today. Subtext isn't just a kind of sort of cool thing that you should be happy about whenever it happens to show up in your story. Subtext is the bona fide magic ingredient that will pop your story off the page into three-dimensional life. Subtext is the juicy, unspoken stuff happening between the lines of the story. Subtext is the massive bulk of the 9/10 of your story's iceberg under the water of the story. It's what makes the whole thing float. It's what makes the story into more than just what's happening in real time on the page, and transforms it into something that lives and breathes in readers' imaginations, because suddenly they are allowed to exercise their own imaginations in filling in some of the blanks. I've talked before about why great subtext is the one ingredient all my favorite stories have in common. Turns out, all my unfavorite stories have one thing in common as well: poorly executed or just plain missing subtext. Subtext thrives in stories where the characters' motivations, personalities, relationships, backstories, and worlds are so rich that the author can't cram all the details into explicit references on the page. Subtext dies in stories where authors feel the need to spell everything out. Sometimes this is the result of a shallow story world in which there's barely enough of the good stuff to fill the story, much less for some of it to be held in reserve. But more often, this results when the author either doesn't trust the readers to understand anything without being told, or can't bear not to share every little detail because it's all so awesome. And this is where prologues all too often come in. Prologues are a huge bone of contention among authors. Tell an author prologues are generally a bad idea, and watch the firestorm erupt. Aren't agents and editors just big, mean stick-in-the-muds for not liking them? Maybe, but then again, maybe not. There are two corresponding reasons authors are often so attached to their prologues. One, because they believe the prologue explains facts necessary for the reader to understand the story. And 2, because they've designed their prologues to showcase awesome things about their stories. The latter is the easiest to deal with. If your story has awesome stuff in it, then it doesn't need a prologue to show readers that. In fact, readers are much more likely to be interested in discovering all this awesome stuff as they go, rather than having it spoon-fed to them. The former reason, however, is by far the more egregious reason for including a prologue, and it's nowhere more evident than in backstory-centric prologues. So with all that in mind, let's take a look at some examples of how poor prologues sap their stories, how the lack of a prologue can strengthen stories, and finally, how to determine if your story is one of the exceptions that needs a prologue. I'm going to be using quite a few examples from film, mostly since they were prominent examples that popped to mind. Everything I say about them is equally applicable to novels. First, the wrong way, unnecessary prologues. If you find yourself tempted to open with a backstory prologue, you're probably doing it because its central event is key to your protagonist's motivations in the main part of the story. Probably this event is your character's ghost or wound, which has created the lie that is at the core of his character arc. This event has defined who he is, and it will have a direct and important bearing on the main story. It's also probably a pretty cool scene, and you're eager for readers to see it and not just be told about it later on, which is a worthy reason. The problem is that when you spell out your character's motivations right up front, you're usually going to be killing a ton of the story's potential subtext. Who a character is, why he behaves the way he does, and what motivates him are the 9/10 of his iceberg. These are the keys to his personality. Give readers the keys right away, and they will have nothing left to unlock and discover. Dramatize this scene, and they will have nothing left to imagine for themselves. The first eighth of Robert Stromberg's Maleficent is all prologue. It introduces Maleficent as a child, shows her idyllic fairyland world, and then dramatizes her ghost. She meets the human boy Stefan, falls in love with him, and is then betrayed when he chops off her wings so he can be king. It's a pretty powerful ghost, and definitely a strong motivation for her revenge scheme throughout the rest of the movie. But, you guessed it, it obliterates the possibility of subtext. By the time we get to the main story of Maleficent cursing, and then forming a bond with, Stefan's daughter Aurora, we know everything there is to know about Maleficent. All her mystery, all her potential complexity, all her depth is gone. Backstory is a tremendous opportunity for sowing mystery and curiosity. When readers don't know exactly why one character hates another, then they're instantly afire to find out. Their own imaginations are engaged, and from that moment on, they're hooked. The other problem with this prologue is that it presents a series of very important scenes in a very short amount of time, which ultimately robs them of their impact. By the way, as a rule of thumb, when a movie starts out with a voiceover, that's usually a sign of the weakest of all prologues. How to Train Your Dragon, however, is a lovely exception. Kevin Reynolds' Tristan and Isolde misses a lot of its opportunities as well, and one of the big ones is the subtext it could have created and didn't, because it offered up a prologue of Tristan's ghost when his parents are killed by the Irish, and the man he will grow up to both revere and betray loses his hand in saving Tristan. The result is that Tristan the man isn't developed enough in the story's beginning. Worse, it destroys the opportunity to have Tristan the man show his convictions and motivations in regard to his mentor. Instead, the story rests the entire weight of one of its most crucial relationships on the weakest part of its story, the prologue. So now let's consider the right way to do it, no prologue. The best stories are those that are rife with heavy backstory happenings, but that don't dump them all in the reader's lap right away. Instead, they use the gravitas of those unnamed events to pull readers in, develop characters, and create tremendous depth. These stories begin in medias res with many things unexplained, but readers roll with it because they know they will discover everything they need to know, as they need to know it and not before. Sometimes these stories eventually spell out the entirety of the backstory for readers. Other times they merely hint and allow readers to fill in the blanks for themselves. Which you choose depends on how important the specificity of the backstory actually is to the main story. Brent Weeks' The Black Prism opens with an emperor-like main character who has years of important backstory behind him. But Weeks uses that backstory of how he usurped his older brother's rulership and has been impersonating him for years at the cost of his relationship with the woman he loves, to sow hints that draw readers in. It creates an atmosphere of rich complexity and interesting motivations within not just the protagonist, but also all the characters around him. This would have been destroyed had Weeks opened with a tell-all prologue that showed readers the truth about this character. Ridley Scott's Gladiator is rich with subtext, thanks to its main character, Maximus, sharing a personal history with the imperial family. It's all the richer because that history is only alluded to, never spelled out, which tells us all we need to know while allowing our own imaginations to fill in the blanks. And finally, consider the other right way, necessary prologues. Sometimes certain stories, simply need a prologue, even at the risk of damaging a little of their subtext. These may be stories that offer insanely complicated settings or backstories that must be explained up front in order for readers to understand what's going on. Or they're stories in which the character's past and or ghost is important setup, but not in itself crucial to the character's arc. Mike Newell's Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, falls into this category. It opens with a prologue that shows its protagonist Dastan as a child, a street rat whose bravery and compassion prompts the king to adopt him. Dastan's past as a beggar child and the fact that he was adopted into the royal family is his ghost, but it's not a ghost that is essential to the story. His motivations throughout the main story would have been completely clear even if his childhood were never referenced at all. Rather, this is the kind of ghost that actually creates more subtext when it is revealed up front than it does when it's only hinted at. What isn't spelled out for readers is everything that happens to Dastan in between his adoption and his adopted father's assassination in the main story. His relationships with his adopted family, more than the adoption itself, are what drive his motives throughout the story. Had the prologue moved beyond the simple setup of his strange place in the world, and instead actually spelled out those relationships by showing him, however briefly, growing up in the palace, that subtext would have been largely destroyed. It's important to note that this kind of backstory prologue is especially tricky, since it's always going to be borderline extraneous. After all, if it's not crucial to the character's arc, why is it necessary at all? Ask yourself if your character becomes less interesting without this setup scene. In Dastan's case, this is definitely true. He loses a defining aspect of his unique character. By contrast, in Tristan's case, he would actually become more interesting if his childhood were less explicit. Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim is a perfect example of a story that needs its exposition-heavy prologue to catch viewers up to speed with the story world. The history of the kaiju attacks and Jaeger technology is crucial to the plot, but it's not central enough to the story to justify making a mystery of it and forcing viewers to discover it as they go. Although it might be worth arguing that the story could possibly have done as well, if not better, without the ghost aspect of the prologue in which the protagonist's brother is killed. Again, this kind of prologue is always risky, especially in a book where it's even more likely to sound like an info dump. So never choose this route if you have another option, and always seek ways to inject conflict and drama to make the information as compelling as possible. There isn't a story anywhere that couldn't be improved with a little more subtext. So when searching for ways to add this all-important magic ingredient to your story, don't forget to examine your prologue. Chances are good you just found the perfect way to add a whole new dimension to your story just by hitting the delete key. Thank you for listening to the Wordplay Podcast. To read a transcript of this episode, you can visit my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And be sure to check back again next week.